Hello, and welcome to the next installment of the 30-minute workout webinar series. My name is Angel Espinoza, and I am an Autodesk Infrastructure Technical Specialist. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Jerry Bartles. In today's session, we will look at various ways to grade a site, thus the title, Sites, How Do I Grade Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. For those of you that are joining this 30-minute workout webinar series for the very first time, welcome. In this series, we attempt to address capabilities beyond the typical need-to-know training. Because it's not possible to cover everything in training, this webinar series intends to show tips, tricks, and lesser-known tools and features that some people never learn or only learn after much use. This way, you can make the most of your Autodesk investment sooner. As for ground rules, examples are typically abstract in nature to focus on functionality. Once you learn how the capability works, of course, you can apply it in many different situations. We commonly start on time and end on time. We try to honor your valuable presence. If for some reason you're unable to watch the webinar live, know that all sessions are recorded, and anyone that registers for the session can view the recording at their convenience. This may also minimize your need to take notes. If you have any questions during the session, please type those in the question and answer pane. Jerry will address as many of those as possible during the session. I may address unanswered questions at the end. If we are unable to answer all questions during the session, someone will get back to you with an answer. If you want to have a one-on-one follow-up call with one of us about a topic that was covered in a session, please type that in the chat pane. We always look forward to chatting with people. Now for today's agenda. We will look at various ways that Civil 3D users can grade a site. These include very simple surface edits by perhaps just simply adding points to a surface. We'll also talk about using Kogo points, but specifically point groups to create surfaces and do grading. We'll talk about feature lines, but one capability in particular, because the last webinar that was held by Alan Gilbert was titled Fun with Feature Lines, and he covered much of the capabilities of what that takes, what is possible. But there was one item that he did mention that based on time that he was not going to cover, and that one we'll pick up today, which has to do with feature line styles for priorities. The software also refers to it as split point resolution. We'll cover that today. But we will not be covering relative feature lines. That is a video that I can share with you. It has access to how that works. We will also be using corridors. Yes, you heard me correctly, corridors to do site grading. That can be very helpful in many situations. The common thing that most people expect, grading objects, will cover that. And then perhaps something that's newer to many of you, grading optimization. It can be far simpler than most people imagine, so we'll cover that nearer the end. Keeping with tradition, oops, I didn't advance all the slides. There's the corridor, there's the grading object, there's the grading optimization. Here we go. Keeping with tradition, this will be a PowerPoint free zone. I will be live in product until I recap at the end of the session. So let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to tab over to my Civil 3D. This one here, I believe. Nope, this one here, and we will get started. Okay, so what we're looking at is a site not far from where I live and am currently located in the city of La Habra, California. This was a former pharmaceutical manufacturing facility that moved to an adjacent city, and when they abandoned the property, all of the buildings were torn down except for one. That happened to be this building here called Building 3. And then all of the other buildings needed these would be new designs for buildings for a significantly more upgraded manufacturing and larger scale customers. So we'll start by noticing, I'll create various surfaces, one for each building. As I use Project Explorer, which for some of you may be new here on the Home tab there, I can use and launch Project Explorer. I already have it open on another window, and I'll drag it here. You'll see that this is able to analyze everything that's in the drawing at the moment. So you'll see there are two alignments, 4 assemblies, 2 corridors, 2 point groups, 11 surfaces. And if I look at the surfaces specifically, most of them have 0 points. So I named them BP or building pad 01, building pad 02. I already have built out 04 for to save time, and then island 01 also, and then we have an existing ground surface that has, what's that, about 140,000 points. So I'll be referring to this Project Explorer from time to time because it does help me get to information quicker versus perhaps browsing through the Prospector tab in the workspace, in the tool space. So starting here with this building, which we'll call building 1, I wish to create a surface for it. Now, the method I'm going to use is to basically do surface edit. So I'll start on the Prospector tab. I'll expand surfaces. There are the various surfaces. This is building pad 01. I'll expand that and expand the definition. And these are the various things that can be added to a surface to help define it. One of them has to do with various edit types. I'll right click on that and very simply choose add point. This will allow me to add points to a surface, even though the surface currently has no points whatsoever. I'll pick this corner and then it asks me down there at the bottom to specify the new elevation. So let's specify a simple number here. I'll use 317 there. I'll pick this corner, likewise pick 317, pick this corner. Now that I'm on my third point and apply 317, you'll see that a line appears. And now I have a triangle basically on that surface, 317. And you're probably already assuming and realizing this is not the most efficient for large scale surface definition, right? Very commonly, I would say this is very useful for defining small areas, maybe high points or low points, drainage points, etc. This can then be done very quickly to add to a surface to define it. Now, as I finish, I'll finish that command. The surface does exist. If I bring over the Project Explorer, we can see that BP01 does contain 7 points at the moment, 6 triangles. If I slide a little bit further, we can see the slope, which you expect minimum slope, maximum slope, or 0, and the elevations are all 317 because it's perfectly flat, right? Now, as I touch this surface, I do have a style currently on that I'm going to be utilizing for that contains contours and triangle edges and points. Now, we are seeing the existing ground contours in the back, and to make things a little bit simpler, I'm going to hide that. Now, instead of changing the style, which many people do, I like coming down here to the isolate objects, clicking on that, and there's 2 choices, hide objects or isolate. I'm going to choose hide. So the entire surface is hidden, and I didn't have to change the style to anything else. This can be done to individual objects, irrespective of how many objects might sit on a layer. I'm not turning off the layer. I'm not changing the style. I'm just hiding that one object temporarily. So now I'm going to touch this, and we see the surface. It did create a triangle across this concave area. I'll come up here to the edit surface, choose delete line, and just very simply with a crossing window, choose that edge. And now that surface is what I would call, at least for the building pad, very much well defined, and I did so via point. So as I move this around, let's change this perhaps to conceptual. There we are. You can see that building there for the pad elevation, at least at the moment, is well defined. Now for building 2, we're going to use a slightly different process. Again, what I can point out with the Project Explorer and the points, there is a point group called building 2. If I select it, these are all of the points. You can see numbers 1 through 7. I can see their elevation, 316.3. All of them are the same. I can see they all have the raw description of building corner. So this can make life simple, that if you have points coming from an outside source or you're creating them yourself in the office, it's to create a point group and then to come back and let's say I'm going to go now to surface building pad 2, look for the definition area. I can come down to point groups and right click on that and choose add. I can now very simply select the point group that I want applied to that surface, hit OK, and that surface will be created. Now, same thing happened here where we have this concave area and very simply touching that, coming up to edit and delete line, that will be the same scenario. Now, I've done so and created surfaces and edited them in 2 distinct ways. I'm not probably going to edit those concave areas again just to save time, but you know that certainly it's possible. Now, touching these 2 surfaces, I'm going to place them in the object viewer and point out one thing. This is a surface and this is a surface. Had the data been added to the same surface, what would very likely happen is this would stitch across. Now, in this scenario, because ultimately I'm going to be pasting everything into a surface that will contain the existing ground, I don't want them to stitch across. I want this to be empty. So that thus having separate surfaces is a relatively good practice. There's another reason why that is also good practice, in that from a collaboration perspective, people can work on different areas or different pieces of a surface individually, do the grading in those locations, and then ultimately pasting them all together. There is a common practice to avoid, in essence, creating them all in a singular surface. That tends to be a little bit more heavy, a little bit more intensive of the effort, because any edits the entire surface, and that being large. And again, that limits a little bit of the collaboration that's possible in this method. So building 3 does contain feature lines. I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, because last time Alan did cover that in the session, again titled "Fun with Feature Lines." So I'm just going to grab those surface or the feature lines as they exist, and very simply go to building pad 3, and for break lines, I right click and choose add. Because I had them selected, I don't have to do it after the fact, but it's possible the other way as well. And this surface now gets created, and you can see I won't get rid of those lines, but that's one of the processes. But one of the things I definitely wanted to cover, as I mentioned, was what happens when feature lines cross. I'm going to then restore a viewport that has a couple of different views of different feature lines. These feature lines, I'm going to turn this one a little bit here just to get this a little better perspective. We're seeing some feature lines that in top view, these 2 feature lines here basically only have 2 points, one at the start and one at the end. But it does bend, basically because the other ones have priority over it. To basically, this one must conform to their will. These arcs on the curve return are in fact defining what must take place. Now, if I wanted to, it is absolutely possible to use commands like, let's say, the move command, and I can grab this line and this line and move them from that endpoint to the same endpoint. And notice now that those 2 feature lines are straight and the other ones are conforming to those. This would be done. This will happen because all of these feature lines are of the same style. If feature lines don't have any style, or they have the same style, basically the last feature line modified are the ones that win. So if I want this to go back, I can use the same command, or any modification command that ultimately doesn't modify. I'm going to move from the endpoint there back to the endpoint there, and now all of these are back to having priority over those. Now, there is another mechanism, a better mechanism to manage that, because what happens if I move my site a little bit, or raise and lower all of them? Because they've been edited, I don't know which one will have priority over which because of an editing order. So here, what's possible is I can take these 2 feature lines, and I'll bring up the properties palette and change them from a style basic to another style. Let's choose ramps. As I unhighlight them, you'll see that those are now yellow. And what this capability is often overlooked or sometimes buried, because to find it, what I'm talking about, we have to go to sites. So I'm going to collapse the surfaces, come over here to sites. All of these feature lines are on a site called, let's see, where are my sites here? A site called curves. And if I expand those, I can ultimately come down here to feature lines, and I can see those feature lines, 2 of which are ramps. But this capability, some people have not yet found, is to right click on feature lines and choose properties. Now, on properties, there are things like the statistics. It tells me how many feature lines are there, how many point PIs are there for all of those feature lines, etc. But the last tab is called options. And if we read that carefully, it says feature line crossing, split point resolution, which style wins over any other style. And if I want those ramps to control, basically what I do is take the feature line style called ramps and raise it up, and then hit OK. And now those styles will control the other styles. So this is what would manage and give us confidence to control feature lines in the grand scheme of things. And that, again, is a site-by-site option capability, and we can control them very exactly. So even if they all move, or have to all be raised or repositioned, edited in some form, I know that these will always win because the style dictates that they must. Okay, so let's collapse this back down. I'm going to go back to a single viewport for the moment. And let's then go, so we've talked about method 1, method 2, method 3 is feature lines. Now, method 4, to use corridors, I've already done it for this building. Now, again, referring to the Project Explorer, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this was done. But if I look at the corridors, so that's the corridors there, I can see that there is one called Building 4. And Building 4 used an assembly called Building 4. And if I look then at the assemblies for Building 04, I can see how it's comprised. And it's basically comprised of two segments. If I zoom in on them, there's one link called link width and slope. And basically it's saying go out from the alignment and profile, go out 2 feet at a -2%. And then there's a daylight one that's basically telling it at a 50% or 1-to-1, 50% down here for cut and for fill, basically find your daylighting. And what it does is it ran that around the outside, but very interestingly, it also filled in the inside. So if I look at that in the object viewer with a single corridor alignment, profile, and assembly, I was able to grade this. Now, the interesting thing about this is I could use the profile, which is up here. And again, this blue profile it's just at a singular elevation. I could use that to adjust or raise or lower the pad. Now, that might be fundamental or somewhat simplistic, but a more interesting way to use corridors is in the following way, and that is to do practically any sort of grading on the site. Now, this particular same corridor will be used to grade this island that's in the middle of this drive space. The entire island, if we look at it, is currently composed of a single assembly that has one subassembly, just a curb. So it's running that curb all the way around. And that profile could be either an existing ground profile or a proposed ground profile. So that makes life rather simple. But if I grab the corridor and I right click and choose the corridor properties or access it from the ribbon, I can change that assembly to be island number 2, which is another assembly that I have, and hit OK, rebuild the corridor. And now instead of a simple curb, it's running curb and gutter around that entire process. That would be using this subassembly down here. And then I have a third one ready and for action, and that will be, again, to grab the corridor, right mouse click, I'll go to, well, let's do it from up here, corridor properties, and we'll choose island and use island 03, hit OK and OK, rebuild it. And now we can see how that subassembly, which had a little space behind the top of the back of curb, a face that could be potentially a planter area, top of the planter down to the soil, and then soil across, is used and run around for this. And by changing the profile, I can either change the design of where that is very simply. Now, just like the building, I did not define this all the way back internally, but it's stitched across there. And if I place that in the object viewer, it's stitched across for me to create that full design of that planter area using the corridor. So it's not just curves, it can be anything. And that one segment that I'm using actually has up to 12 different delta X, delta Ys that I can utilize. And I'm only using at the moment, I think that was either 4 or 5 of those. So that would be another method. Now, the more common method that people expect is to use a grading, right? And here, I won't belabor this point too very much. To use a grading, what I can do then is using the grading creation tools. I have a grading. It's from a site called Building 5. The grading group is called Building 5 and 05 to be exact. I'm going to use the grade out a distance and then assign a grading to this feature line. So that's all that is. It's a feature line. And it is up at elevation. So I'm going to grab that, grade to the outside, apply to the entire length, yes. And then it's asking me to specify the distance, 2 feet. And then how do I wish to get out that 2 feet? I can do so by grade or by slope. Let's do so by grade, and I'll use the -2% grade. So it now has created, and I have now a second feature line here generated from the first. It's 2 feet outside of it and 2% lower everywhere. So if I wish to continue, let's say I'm going to grade to a surface and create the grading. We'll specify that. I noticed I didn't have to specify a side because there's already a grading to this side of it. It knows you can only grade to the outside. Specify to the entire length, yes. How do I wish to specify it? For cut, I'm going to use grade of 50%. For fill, I'm going to use grade of 50%, hit a return. And now that grading object has been created, and you can see the nice corner there as it exists. Now, one of the common things that people that use grading are familiar with is that ultimately, if I have an empty area in the middle, I have to create an infill as opposed to just creating the slopes. When I create an infill and I specify this area here in the middle, it now has filled in that area. And we can tell that by this little icon right here. It's just a little diamond that's telling it when I select it, the area that it has filled in. So if I unselect it and highlight it, you can see that went back to green all the way around. Now, what I'm going to point out is the grading group properties. You can recall that I'm using grading group building 05, but under the properties all along, this has not been creating a surface, and it's certainly possible where I can turn this on, and we'll call this building, not to, just to conform to the other ones, BP05. Let's make that BP05 and hit OK there and OK there. And now a surface has been generated that if I touch that surface, place that in the object viewer, from the grading, we can see how that was all defined, right? Relatively straightforward. And it does have that little, almost a shelf that's 2 feet out and 2% down. Okay, now, this session is intended to show there are, just like there are many ways to do a move command, right? I can type in move, I can hit M, I can hit a return, I can choose it off the palette, or I can create custom tools to do moves. What we're trying to emphasize is there are many ways to do grading, and most people find their one way and they're comfortable with that, and that's what they continue to utilize. But we want to encourage everyone to find and perhaps mix the various methods into the overall design. So here, if I were to ultimately say I have a final surface, let's come back to the surfaces, and here it's called FG, or for finished ground. I'll right click on that, or expand that, excuse me, and go down to the definitions. I can do edits and paste in to get to the end result. I might want to say, well, let's start off by pasting in the existing ground. And now my finished ground is the same as the existing ground. And as it turns out, I can do many of them at once. I'll say paste surface, and I'll grab BP 02 down to BP 05 and hit OK. And all of those will then be added in. You can see the edits here. Pasted this, pasted this. I skipped number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in any scenario, I can then grab that, look, let's select it, and then place that in the object viewer. And we then end up with a combined surface that is utilizing the various forms, right? Maybe wireframe would be best in this scenario. And we can see those building pads are all added into the overall, right? And the missing building pad 1. But another method that's possible that many people have are just finding out about is something called grading optimization. And grading optimization, what I want to point out, can be rather simple. If I turn this ultimately on its side, what we're finding is up here, there's simply a surface. I think there's one polyline up there for some reason. I left the polyline up there. But all of this other data is down here at 0. If I rotate that around, you can see all of this is down here at 0. Let's go back to the top view. And what are those things? Basically, let's turn off the geolocation to clean this up a little bit. I'm going to turn off the surfaces here to, again, using this hide method, so they go away. And it's a very simple drawing that we have left here. So understanding there is an existing ground surface, and then I drew polylines originally to define the buildings. And then I drew this line here that I wanted to define as a drain line. So using the under the Analyze tab and the Grading Objects panel that you can toggle on, you can see as I toggle it, they appear over here. I can then apply things like a grading limit to the outside. So if I touch this outside polyline, this is a grading limit. This was applied to just the polyline. It understands, and it has then a couple of properties that I've configured, 0 to 3 to 1, as the grading for the entire site. Now for a building, if I touch this, this then, I want only the one. If I touch this, I gave it a name, and it has properties. I gave it a color, and this is defining a building pad. And I did that 8 times, and thus the 8 kind of whatever color that is, light brown. And then I thought that's kind of simple. Let's even drop in lines that are representative of the curb and gutter. So I have then the curb and gutter, excuse me, just curb and curb objects, and they're just lines with polylines with fillets until I assign the curb option to them. At that point, they become these intelligent objects that have the properties, and here it's 0.5 and 0.5 for the height and the width. The drain line was a simple polyline drawn at 0, and then we told it that we want to have down here, let's see, a drain line, this object down here, and then we, that's it. We gave it a name, gave it a different color, and ultimately, what we can then do is on this tab, Analyze and Optimization, we can click that, and it wants to know, it says select the existing ground, press enter to use EG, which is the surface that I intended, and that's the fact that it has the same name is both a coincidence and a purpose. And this will start the process. Now, generally, again, all of those items were down at 0. So what's going to happen is when I said optimize, it's going to start looking at the existing ground surface and saying all these items that are down at 0, I'm going to drape onto the surface and then start making them be whatever intelligent objects they're intended to be. So that means that building pads will be perfectly flat, curbs will be defined, the cyan ones will be defined as 6 inches tall with a 6-inch top. The drain line will dictate that there must be drained from the high side to the low side. So we do create that, and it's possible to reverse the order if we drew it in the wrong direction. I can tell it to reverse, and so it drains in the correct direction. But that's it. All of those items were down at 0, including the building pads and so forth. And once this gets to the point where the little wrench right here, it'll physically start moving the triangles so that they adhere to that capability. So now it's there, and they'll start changing colors, and it's physically now trying to grade the site per these parameters. And you can see the color coding, some of the contours are going to start to disappear because the buildings are flat, etc. I left this running for about somewhere between 20 to 25 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, at one point. And we can have this running for as long as we wish and ultimately stop it. This will keep going technically forever if we want it to, until it adheres to all of the capabilities. Now, there is this convergence plot that tells us how close we are to it being no more changes. It's still making a significant amount of changes, but ultimately the changes will be less and less as it gets closer and closer to a true definition. Now, I'm going to use the Betty Crocker style and jump to the end process, but I'm going to point out, once I choose stop, let's say it's 25 minutes later, I choose stop, I can then say, send the optimized results, which will grab the surface and all of the feature lines that were used as a part of that definition, and I can push that back into the drawing. Again, remember, I started with things just down at 0. Ultimately, here, I can then say, I want to push in that one surface, I can push in all the feature lines, I can decide whether I want them or not, and then I'm going to cancel that because I've already done this, and point out that on the tool space, then I have grading object number 4, or my 4th attempt, and as I select it and place that in the object viewer, all of this then got defined. And let's place this in conceptual view. And as I get close, you'll very clearly be able to make out that there is in fact curved, and if I put it in wireframe, even that 3D wireframe, you can see the curve is 6 inches tall, 6 inches wide. The building pad is going to be perfectly flat, etc. All this was done with the grading object very quickly, very easily. So with that, encouraging that tool, coming back to the PowerPoint, then we did in fact talk about the various ways to edit COGO points, feature lines, corridors, grading objects, and ultimately even grading optimization. Jerry, in the about 10 seconds that we have left, are there any outstanding questions?
I think I'm caught up on most of them. I've got one from Michelle here. Can you run a surface through grading optimization more than once?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can do it in, remember, you don't have to do it all at once. You can do subcomponents, or I can create a grading area, a smaller grading area, and that's my intended purpose. I'll do this section, that section, and another section. Yes.
Okay. And I've got one more here I can throw at you on composite surfaces, those being made from pasting multiple surfaces together. For the sake of drawing stability, does Autodesk recommend editing the tin in the parent surface or in the composite surface? Like in the example where those interior corners had unwanted tin in the building pad grading.
Yeah, I would always change it in the original. So everything downstream propagates in the cleanest form.
All right, sounds good. I think we're in good shape.
Well, with that, on behalf of Jerry Bartles and myself, thank you for attending. We are super appreciative of your time. We hope that you found today's time well spent, and we look forward to our next get together. Bye for now.